Well, good evening and a very warm welcome on behalf of Milim to this evening's presentation. Welcome wherever you are in the UK and wherever you are in the world. And I'm delighted to welcome our viewers from Ukraine tonight. We have people there. This is a first for us. Milim reaches all parts of the globe, and it's nice to have a new country on board. This evening, our series of online talks and conversations continues with our guest, Gillian Freedman. I'll introduce Jill to you in just a moment after some brief housekeeping. Please do ask questions. It's easy to do this. Just type whatever you'd like to ask into the Q&A facility on your screen. As ever, we will do our best to get through as many of your questions as we can. There's also a chat facility on your screen, and you can use this if you wish to send a message to all of the other participants on this webinar. We are recording this event, and it will appear on our website at milim.org.uk in the next couple of days. There you will find recordings of other past events as well as details of our future programme for which you can book tickets. And so to our guest today. Gillian Freedman was born Gillian Cohen and grew up in a council flat with her parents and younger brother. The family were frightened of animals, and the only pet they ever owned was a goldfish that they won at the Hampstead Heath Fair. Aged just 17, Gillian married her teenage sweetheart after a 2-week engagement. The couple embarked on an adventure which continues to this day, and much of which is documented in this amazing book, Jews, Milk, Goats. Jill, a warm Milim welcome to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, for the benefit of those of us who've not been fortunate enough to read your book, briefly, what's it about?
What's it about? It's about, in part, my life up to now, in this great adventure, partly living in London, partly living in Devon, my involvement with Ukraine and the Jewish community there, and for the last 10 years, having left the bubble of North London, where we did live very happily for 30 years, the last 10 years we've been on a small holding in rural Bedfordshire. And the way that the book is written is that I incorporate the Jewish calendar, the festivals, Shabbat, and the seasons, and the animals and the gardening and the year are really in sync with the festivals that we celebrate at the Gables as Jews, as out and open and practicing Jews.
So maybe we can pick up on that a little bit later. But you were scared of animals. So was there a point where that changed? Was there a sudden sort of change of mind, or did this happen gradually?
Well, it happened because this boyfriend of mine, who I've been married to for 49 years, and I actually didn't get married till I was 18, but it's not far off. He brought a dog to our flat, our little council flat, and this great big red setter took up most of the room in the lounge, and we had to go for long walks with this dog. So I had to get used to the dog, or I had to ditch the boyfriend. So I decided I'd get used to dogs, and then after dogs, and we got married, I thought I'd have a cat. And then after a cat, we decided after a few years of marriage, we were going to go and live on a small holding in Devon. And I really had to get used to animals, although I was still a little bit frightened, and I couldn't pick up a chicken then. Now picking up a chicken or a duck is child's play to me. But it's funny, I think it just shows that people can change, and fears that you might have had when you were young, you can overcome.
What was it that made you want to write a book, and particularly write a book now?
I've always scribbled, as my husband would call it. I've always written poems for all the family for birthdays, although they're quite scathing about them. But I have always written. I've been to writing groups. And really, the thing I've always wanted to do is to write a book. But it was always time, you know, bringing up a family and working and then running a small holding. And then my lovely aging mother, who really I wanted to see as much as possible, but she lived in London. So once or twice a week, I would drive to London. And when she passed away 2 years ago, I thought it was now or never. If I didn't sit down and use the time to write that book, that at my age, and I'm nearly 68, it would never get written. So I decided to instill a bit of discipline in my fairly undisciplined life and sit down and write a book.
And did you write every day, or did you sort of sit down and just write it, or did it come in little bits?
Well, the first thing I did was I transcribed about 60,000 words of a diary that I'd handwritten when I lived in Devon. In the old days, we didn't have computers, and I handwrote this diary because it was such a different life that I was living. So I transcribed the diary, and then I saw there was a lot of material in there which I really wanted to put into the book, and which mirrored to some extent the life I was living now, slightly differently, but similar animals. And so that's how I managed to get the idea of writing about then and now. And I would sit down probably 2 or 3 times a week for several hours and just sit at my desk and write. And I got thousands and thousands of words, but I really didn't know what to do with them. And I engaged somebody, a writing coach, on the advice of somebody from the suburb who'd written a best-selling book herself. And she gave me some advice. She said, "You've never written a book before, and he will probably help you." And he did. He said, "Look, I know nothing about Jews or Judaism. I find that part of it very interesting. Why don't you try and use the Jewish calendar to put the book around, to give it a shape?" And that's really what happened. It helped me to put all these thousands of words into a shape. And for that, I'm very grateful. And also, I'm a very impatient person. So I really wanted to write the book within about 2 weeks. But in fact, I started writing in January of last year. And I engaged the writing coach in March. And then I'd finished the book really by August. And then after that, between then and it being published, it was really sort of knocking it into shape and trying to, cut off the words that weren't necessary.
So you mentioned the Jewish calendar, and indeed the book pretty much follows the path of the Jewish calendar, the timeline of the Jewish calendar. Do you feel in some way that living the life that you do gives you a different understanding of the calendar to your contemporaries who maybe live in town?
I definitely think it does, because when the festivals occur, for example, Shavuot, which is the time of year when, it's sort of late spring, early summer, when we find that cows and goats have got lots of lovely lush pasture, so they're producing lots of milk. Now, when we celebrated Shavuot in London, yes, we made cheesecake. But why did we make cheesecake? Why did we have milky foods? Well, there are reasons in the Torah and in the Old Testament why we had milky foods. But there are also reasons because at that time of year, you have lots of milk and you need to make cheese with it, or you have lots of eggs and you have lots of the sorts of foods that would go with Shavuot. Now, it wouldn't have occurred to me before, but when I'm now living in the country, it makes absolute sense. Similarly, at Pesach, at Passover, we have an abundance of eggs because during the winter, chickens tend to go off lay because they need the daylight and they need the warmth. So you don't get lots of eggs during the winter, but come the spring, they're suddenly laying eggs right, left, and center. And what do you do with them? Well, you boil them and you eat them at the Seder meal, and you make lots of foods that contain eggs at Passover. So lots of these things then make sense. They dovetail with the festivals, with the year, with our calendar, but also with the farming calendar. And remember that Judaism is very much an agricultural religion. We lived on the land. And even in the shtetl, even back in the times of my great-grandparents, they probably lived on a shtetl where they kept a few chickens and where they grew things and they understood where their food came from. So yes, it's very much given me a deeper understanding of the religion.
And what about in practical terms? Because the Torah has many rules about agriculture, most of which I would imagine most people never need to apply or never come across. So are there sort of particular elements of religion or halakha which you've discovered you need to be aware of?
I think an awful lot of those rules actually only applied in temple times, so they don't really apply to us today. There are more esoteric points about redeeming the firstborn animal. That's something I haven't delved into, but I know it's something that my husband was interested to find out, and actually has asked Rabbonim, what he should do about the redemption of firstborn bulls or goats or whatever. But generally, no, there are practical sides because we're observant Jews. So we have a little milking machine that we use on our goats to milk our goats on a daily basis. But come Shabbat, on the Sabbath, we can't use electricity in that way. So we hand milk on the Sabbath. And so there are little points like that. And other than that, I don't think there are too many aspects in present day, because we haven't got the temple time that really applies. The same with, we plant a lot of trees, and we plant trees particularly at the festival of Tu B'Shvat, the New Year for trees. Now, you're not allowed to or not supposed to eat the fruit of those trees for 5 years. So we do follow that, that's for sure. Interesting.
So what can you share about your sort of early days in Devon on this farm? Was it something of a culture shock for you?
Yeah.
What sort of things did you find you had to do that you hadn't done before?
Well, virtually everything, actually, because having come from a flat, we both grew up in flats, and then we had a little Victorian house in London with a tiny garden. So we were learning everything. But we didn't have computers and Google and iPhones and all the rest of it. So we had to learn from our neighbors, from trial and error, and from old-fashioned books. So we learned how to grow things, and amazingly, they did grow, and we did eat them. We took on animals, and we learned how to milk a goat, because we did have goats in Devon as well. We had cows. We decided to buy Jacob sheep, because they're biblical sheep. And at the time, I, and still am, a devotee of the Archers. And the Archers were telling all their listeners that the Jacob sheep breed was a dying breed. So we decided we better get some Jacob sheep and help to preserve the breed, which we did. And we had ducks and chickens, but all of this was new to us, and all of this we had to learn. It is in the book. Some mistakes were made, but generally we muddled through, and our neighbors were kind to us, and they helped us. The local farmer was very kind, because our Jacob ram kept jumping into his field, and he had lovely white sheep, and we had these lovely black and white spotted sheep. So one year, after he jumped in once too often, the next spring when the lambs came out, my poor farmer's neighbor's lambs were black and white spotted ones, but he didn't throw a fit or anything. He was very kind about that. And in fact, we didn't generally tell people we were Jewish when we lived there, because it was a long time ago. It was in the 70s. Again, people were very insular then. I don't think that had we told them we were Jewish, it wouldn't really have meant very much. There were not many ethnic minorities living where we lived, or almost none, actually. And we didn't want to stick out. We didn't want to be seen as different. We wanted to try and be accepted as smallholders. It was odd enough that these people had come from London and wanted to try and grow all their vegetables and have animals around them. To say then we were Jewish, we really didn't know what sort of reception we would get. So we kept very quiet about it.
What sort of made you want to do this? I mean, I would imagine it was something you spoke about for a while before you actually moved out of London. Was there some particular thing that drew you to trying this lifestyle?
Well, I would say we were probably a pair of old hippies. So we liked the idea of living off the land, although I was working as a physiotherapist and my husband was studying for his second and third degree and then went on to become a lawyer. But we liked the idea of saving the planet, which was probably ahead of its time. I mean, we really did recycle and reuse everything. So yes, we talked about it. I was a little nervous about it. My husband's always the one who's more adventurous. And I'm quite happy to sort of follow his plans. And generally they work out. And it was a great adventure. We were very young. So when you're young, you can try these things. And if they don't work out, well, then you say, put it down to experience. But it was a wonderful, very enriching experience. We met some wonderful people. We made very good friends, some of whom may even be on this webinar tonight. And we learned a lot. We learned a great deal. And we were sad to leave. We did leave because by then we had a 2-year-old and another on the way. And being Jewish and being so far away from our families began to feel like it was going to be very difficult and not good for the children or for us. So we came back to London, or went back to London, and we stayed there. We stayed there for a long time, for 30 odd years. And we had a great life in London too. It was very comfortable. It was very easy. We were near all the grandparents and the synagogues, all the kosher facilities. Life was easy. But it got a bit too easy and we felt we needed another adventure.
So when did that happen? When did you decide you wanted to leave London?
Well, Jeremy hit 60. I think when you hit certain milestones, you think about the future and what time you've got left and what you want to do. And he really did want to grow vegetables on a large scale again. He did want to get out from being in a very lovely but rather tight bubble in North London. And I also thought that I would like a bit more space. I would like the opportunity of one more big adventure going into maybe our dotage. I hope not quite yet, but you've got to do it while you've still got the strength. And we discussed it with our families, and we got the blessing of we had 4 parents alive when we did this. We also had children, 2 children, and we had 1 grandchild who didn't want us to leave. He was only 4, but then we explained he'd have lots and lots of space here and lots of animals. So he came round to the idea. And we decided we were both still working in London. We needed to be within striking distance of London. And we sort of stuck a pin in coming out of North London on the A1 is very easy. And we found this lovely place which just fitted the bill with 5 acres and a few rather dilapidated buildings. It hadn't been touched for years. And it was a project. And we rolled up our sleeves and we got to work. And it worked.
So wait, you actually moved into it when it was still quite run down and gradually fixed it?
Yes, there was a certain amount of work needed doing to the house, like 38 new windows and a new boiler and a new septic tank and central heating and all that sort of thing. A new kitchen, that was quite large. But we also knew we had this wonderful 350-year-old barn that was falling down in a stable, but completely falling down. You couldn't use it. But we realized that we wanted to be able to have lots of friends come and stay and keep the Sabbath with us and observe, enjoy the festivals here. So after a while, we decided to do up the barns and make accommodation available, which we did. So we have a lot of outside bedrooms and we have a wonderful beamed barn that we can seat maybe 40 in for meals. And we put in fencing. The ground hadn't been touched for 40 years. Our predecessor hadn't touched it. He said he called it as a joke, his nature reserve. But when we actually cut the grass, we discovered there was this wonderful ridge and furrow fields underneath the grass. And ridge and furrow is medieval farming. It's the relics of medieval farming. So my husband had planned to make a cricket pitch out there, but when he realized that it wasn't going to be flat and that we would have to flatten it, he decided not to. And we've kept this wonderful ridge and furrow fields, which you don't see much of these days.
Now, you said when you were in Devon, you didn't tell people you were Jewish. What about now? Has your attitude changed?
But it's completely changed because I realized that I didn't. First of all, I think people are much more aware of all ethnic minorities and all different religions. We all are. We see it on our televisions. We all live in sort of cosmopolitan society where we mix with all sorts of people, which I always have done because I've always was always at non-Jewish schools, and my husband and I have always had friends of every type and every race and religion. And we decided there was no point in, at our age, hiding who we were and what we were, and that we needed to be out and open about who we were, partly because it means that if you are observant Jews, there are certain things you're not going to be able to do on Friday nights and Saturdays with when people ask you to come to a party or if they ask you to eat at their house, because we keep kosher, so we wouldn't eat at anyone's house. We're also vegetarian. So I thought, well, I'm not going to hide it this time. When I lived in Devon, it was a different time, a different place. Now I had to be honest about who I was and hope to be accepted for who I was as a person, as well as a Jew. And people have been wonderful. People have been interested. People have been welcoming, and they understand and they're interested.
And are you the only Jews in the village, or have you found any more?
Strangely enough, I think one finds that there are Jews everywhere. Some are Jews who are married to non-Jews, and some are Jews who prefer to keep it under the radar. But actually, we did make a Hanukkah party the first year we were here, and we invited people, explained what it was, and Jeremy began to give an explanation of why we like the Hanukkah lights. And as he did that, one of my friends, Heather, said, you don't need to tell us that because there's another couple in the village and they made a Hanukkah party last year, which was quite extraordinary because it's a very small village. As it happens, they are people that live here part of the time and part of the time in London. But of course, we became firm friends. But then we became firm friends with everybody, irrespective of what religion they are. And so that was nice, and it was funny. And sometimes if they're here, they'll come and join us for Kiddush on Shabbat morning. So that's very nice and quite unexpected.
Now, a few years after your relocation, COVID struck, the country was locked down. How did you cope with this? Did it present any particular challenges being where you were, or indeed did it present any opportunities?
Well, first of all, I have to say I loved it. I mean, I loved it in some respects because there were no planes flying overhead, no cars going around. We don't get many cars or planes overhead, but it was completely quiet. It was completely still and just wonderful. And our daughter, son-in-law, grandson, who was 10 at the time, and my niece, all through everything that they cared about and joined and drove before the restrictions to join us at the Gables. So we were like a little family unit at the Gables. And that was very special to have that time. Although for my 10-year-old grandson, he didn't see another child for 12 weeks, which is quite tricky. And he coped with it very, very well. So during COVID, Jewish people who were trying to keep Passover were having trouble getting, getting eggs. Well, we had a superabundance of eggs because as I explained before, it was that time of year. We also had family with us so that we could have the Seder night, the special meal on Passover, we could actually have together. Now, many people were completely on their own for that. Same happened at Shavuot. A few weeks later, we were all together, and it was pretty wonderful. There were challenges in terms of getting kosher ingredients, but my son-in-law is very good at getting Tesco's slots, and he did all that. I didn't go shopping for 12 weeks. I didn't, basically, other than going for a walk a country walk, I didn't really leave the premises, and I didn't need to. And I felt as though I had everything here. The big sadness really was that my mother had moved into a Jewish care home 6 months before COVID struck, and she was very, very happy there. It was her decision to go there, and she was already 92 when she went in there, and it was wonderful. But COVID struck, and we couldn't visit her, and that was terrible. It was terrible for her. It was terrible for all old people and all old people's families when they couldn't be together. So that was a great sadness. But so COVID really did a lot of damage in that respect. But for me, it didn't make a lot of difference. We had all our animals around us. They were still giving birth. We had baby goats. Kids were born during the first lockdown, and it was totally wonderful. The only downside was that all these new the people that came to stay with me, all my family, they'd all said, "Oh, it's wonderful. Don't worry, Mum. We'll help you. We'll feed the animals. We'll dig the garden, and you and Dad can have a lie-in sometimes." Well, in 12 weeks, I don't think they lifted a finger other than to stroke the goats and to eat the food and to get some shopping from Tesco. But other than that, it went very, very well.
Now, you said you're both vegetarians, and yet you write with what I read as some delight about your cats catching rabbits, and then on several occasions in the book you take an animal which clearly you love dearly to be dispatched at the abattoir. How do you square this?
Right. So this is, I think, when you read in the book a lot, one of my pet hates or my hobby horses is factory farming. So even with all our animals, we know them. We know them, even the chickens. The chickens have personalities. They've all got personalities, and they're well cared for. They're loved. They have a good life here. Now, when they have to be dispatched, either because of disease or because we sell them on to people who we know are going to fatten them up and eat them, that would be the lambs. I have a relatively clear conscience because I know that if you have animals, you can't keep them all. And in particular, Jonathan, as a male, I have to tell you that you only need one male for your flock or your herd, because if you have two males, they're going to fight. So we have one ram for our flock of sheep. We would have one billy goat for the herd of goats. You can't, and the same with the cows. You can't have lots of males. So those males are going to have a shortened life. And I think that's part of the price you have to pay if you want to keep animals. You have to accept that. But what you can do is make sure that the life that they have is a good life and not a life as per these huge factory farms where you might have thousands of cows that never see a blade of grass. You might have millions, literally millions of chickens in chicken sheds that only have a few meters of space around them and have no quality of life at all. That is not the case here. So when a chicken needs to go or be dispatched, I might call on somebody in the village to come and, well, we'll call it dispatch, but it's kill that bird. But that bird will have had a relatively long life and a wonderful outdoor life, and it will be killed very quickly and be eaten. It won't be wasted, and it will be appreciated. So I don't want to eat them myself, but I can square the idea of keeping animals and some of them having to be killed.
Now, the government has all sorts of regulations about keeping animals and testing animals, and indeed sometimes slaughtering animals. Have you sort of felt the impacts of DEFRA rules, and do you think they're doing the right thing?
Well, there is a section in the book which talks about when we kept cows. We don't have cows anymore because during COVID it was so hot that the grass wasn't growing, and we ran out of really a pasture for our cows, and I decided it was time to get rid of cows. They were too big. But we had two beautiful Dexter cows, Lucy and Beatty. And the government has a rule that in certain areas of the country, you have to be TB tested, tuberculosis tested, so many times in a period of time. So we're in a low risk area. So when our cows were being tested for TB, we didn't think anything of it because we knew that there was a very low risk that they'd have it. Well, unfortunately, Beatty came back with a positive test for TB, which we really couldn't believe because we bought her from a registered herd. She'd never been off our premises and she'd only ever been with her sister. So we got a second test done and I'm afraid it came back positive. And that meant that by the rules of DEFRA that she had to go and be destroyed. And a post-mortem was done and they actually couldn't find anything. They couldn't find any lesions on her lungs, but they sent us a check as compensation for 4 times the amount that we paid for her. So something is a bit strange there. It's a very old, clunky test, and we were not very happy about it. And I think a lot of farmers aren't very happy about it. But it did strike me at the time. I did say to my brother, I think I could make a good living like this if I bought in a whole lot of cows and infected them with TB and they paid me 4 times the amount. It didn't make sense. There's also been a lot of problems with avian flu, which you might have heard about, bird flu. So there were a lot of restrictions the past few years where we had to keep our birds inside to stop the spread of avian flu. Interestingly enough, this year they haven't done that because it didn't seem to stop the spread of avian flu. So now the birds are not restricted. And I'm much happier that the birds can be out than be kept in a barn or in a polytunnel. So yes, there are certain rules and regulations, and we do follow them. They may be, some of them may not be such good regulations, but we're certainly not going to come foul of the law.
So to our audience, if you have questions for Jill, put them in the Q&A now. I can't believe there aren't more questions flying in. This is really fascinating. I'm sure there are things you want to ask, and I'm going to kick off with a question from Abigail Kaplan. And Abigail says, did you ever watch The Good Life and compare your life to theirs, or were you inspired perhaps by that program?
Yes, we did watch The Good Life. I think my husband watched it more than I did. And yeah, that was a lovely, amusing take on what we're doing. But I think it was, yeah, lots of people have said, oh, you're living the good life. People of a certain age know the program. And I don't think it inspired us, but it certainly amused us and still does if we ever catch it on an old channel. Living the dream.
Yeah. Naomi Stone wants to know if you have hired help on your farm.
No, we don't actually. We were looking for some help at some point. I actually gave up work after a year after I moved here because one of us needed to be around all the time. And Jeremy at the time, pre-COVID, was going to London quite a few days a week. He still is working, but he can now do most of it on Zoom. So we did have a lovely fellow, a friend of ours called Chris, that came up 2 mornings a week. Very nice chap. Unfortunately, like us, he's getting to a certain age and he's no longer able to, the last couple of years, he hasn't been able to help. He's got one ailment after another. So we do it actually all ourselves, which kind of amazes me. I don't really know how, but we do. We have got a little old tractor, which is out of commission at the moment. We're hoping to get that repaired. That certainly helps with the garden in terms of digging. But yes, we do it all ourselves. Yeah.
So this was something I wanted to ask you, because reading the book, the work you do is clearly very physically demanding, not just in terms of, you know, having to be up at early hours to tend to the animals, but it's actually physically exhausting as well. And I just wonder, you know, have you thought that there's a time you'll need to slow down, or is that not on the agenda at the moment?
Well, let me start by saying that when we moved here, everybody that we knew who was sort of religiously observant Jews, or even our parents, would say, how are you going to manage there? How are you going to manage living so far from Jewish life and from synagogue and from kosher shops? After 10 years, people who join us and love it here, and we have lots of visitors, realize that we could manage that very, very well. We created a setup where we could manage it. Now people are saying, how are you going to manage there as you're getting older? Now, obviously, we know we're getting older, but I see around me many, many people who are much older than me, who are still managing to look after their animals and their gardens. I think it's, I don't go to the gym. Why would I need to go to the gym? This is the most wonderful workout. It's a natural workout. Also, we can begin to tailor things so that they might be a bit easier. So instead of growing the vegetables right in the ground, I've got a few raised beds. And as I get older, those raised beds might get a bit higher so that I don't have to bend down as much. Perhaps we won't have quite as many sheep in the flock next year. We're going to try to have a few less lambs. So at the moment, we're bottle feeding 3 lambs 4 times a day. And that is a bit of a bind. On the other hand, what could be more delightful than cuddling a lamb 4 times a day, or cuddling 3 lambs 4 times a day? It's such a pleasure. I'm sure it gives us a lot of, I think it's called pheromones or whatever it is. It gives you such a boost that actually, I think it makes you healthy. Certainly, yes, I do have lots of aches and pains, but somehow you can overcome them when you're looking after animals or digging. And when you're outdoors, it's the most wonderful health benefit.
We do have a question. Tell us about the produce you grow, please.
Right. Well, let's start with the goat's milk, which we milk every day. We get about 2 litres or more of milk a day. So at the moment, we're using that milk to feed the bottle-fed lambs. But usually, Jeremy makes cheese with that. All different sorts of cheeses, feta, mozzarella, Wensleydale type cheese, cheddar cheese. I make halloumi cheese. So we have our own cheese and we have our own milk. We have lots of eggs.
And what is the difference? Is it the bacteria that you use to ferment the cheese? I mean, if you're starting with the same milk, you're making all these different kinds of cheese. What makes them different?
It's the process.
Right.
It's how long you heat it for, at what temperature. Halloumi is very simple for me. I don't get into the more complicated cheese making, but honestly, it's not difficult. It's just a process. So you just have to be on hand, a bit like when you're milking a goat. You can't rush it. You've got to be in it and doing it, and then it's the same with the cheese. It's just a whole process, but it's not complicated and it tastes delicious. And we know that the goats have been well cared for. They haven't the milk hasn't come from a herd of cows that have been worn out and had their babies taken away from them at birth. So that's the cruelty when we drink cow's milk. We know that we are contributing to this factory farming and the cruelty towards animals. Now we grow masses of fruit. We've planted lots of fruit trees. We've got lots of fruit trees here: apples, plums, pears, cherries. We make that into jam. We make it into chutney. We make cider. We make perry, which is pear cider, and we grow virtually every vegetable that you can imagine, and lots that you can't buy in the shops. Things like black currants and red currants, white currants, gooseberries, all the things that I grew up with as a child that were cheap and were available and were English, quintessentially English, you don't see in the shops now, or if you do, they're exorbitant. Well, we have so many of these things, pounds and pounds of them, and we freeze them, bottle them, make jam with them. So we have tremendous fruit and vegetables, all organic, because we have our own manure from the animals. It's a whole system. So the manure goes into the ground, makes it extremely fertile, and we grow wonderful produce, which we eat. But of course, there's much too much. We give it away. Whenever visitors come, we give them veggie boxes to take home, and we have a lot of visitors. So we enjoy cooking that food for our visitors. Yeah.
A couple of family questions. Michael Cohen says, what did your mum make of your life in the country? And Eve Charing says, do your children plan to take over your farm at an appropriate time?
There's an expression, alavai. I only wish that my children would like to take this place over. I've completely given up with my lovely daughter and son-in-law and my son, all of whom have got no idea about farming and no interest. They love coming here. They love inviting their friends here, but they have no idea about what to do. And they actually don't want to take it over. So now I'm banking on my grandchildren. The oldest one, who used to take an interest, now has turned into a teenager and really can't be bothered, grandma. The next two are only 10 and 7, and they are very interested. I'm trying to encourage them in that, but I don't know. And the youngest is only a baby, and I haven't asked her yet, but if all else fails, I'll hope that she will. I would hate to think that all the work we've put into it would vanish. On the other hand, if we have to sell it to somebody in the long term who would like to take it over and look after it, that's all we can do. I mean, I don't feel it's ours forever. I feel, we've been given this opportunity to live here. I'm enjoying it. I want to improve it. And I hope that the family will take it over, but I have no great expectations, I'm afraid.
One of our viewers is interested to know if you have any bees. You could tell them to go and buy the book if you wanted to.
We certainly do have bees. I stay away from them as much as possible. In fact, Jeremy went to see the bees today. At this time of year, he goes to check on the hives because they're getting active. He wants to make sure they've got enough stores to eat so that they don't die before they start going off and foraging from the blossom, which is just beginning to come out. You might be able to see some almond blossom behind me because we were pruning trees today. So once the blossom comes out, the bees can go and collect their own nectar and bring it back to the hive. But at the moment, they need a bit of help. So he said, would you like to come with me to see the bees? I do have a bee suit. I said, absolutely not. I only help him with the bees if I absolutely have to. I do not like bees buzzing around my head, even though I've got a bee-proof hood on. I don't trust them. And there's quite an amusing story in the book about that, which nearly resulted in my neighbours calling the police. But you'll have to read the book about and to find out.
We have a question from Helen Linden in Jerusalem. How does the farm manage without you when you travel? This is an assumption that you travel. I imagine you travel.
Well, I do know who Helen is. And Helen, I don't travel anymore. The last time I traveled was a week to Israel a few years ago. I hate airports. I hate leaving this place. I hate leaving the animals. I occasionally go to London for a Shabbat or for a festival to be with the family. But I'm never happier than when I'm returning. So I have no desire to leave here in the near future or in the future. No, I don't really travel anymore, and very happy to be here because I'm happy here. My father, and I think Michael Cohen, who asked a question before, is actually my brother. I suspect it's my brother. But my father always said to my mother, why do you want to travel if you're happy in the life that you've got? And I feel very blessed to feel happy every day when I wake up, rain or shine, because I go out and I see the animals and I commune with nature in some respects, and I have my visitors come to me. I don't need to go anywhere.
Now, this is an interesting question from Yvonne Cheney. Yvonne is in Southern California, regularly joins the Milim program. Yvonne says, I have 2 etrog trees I grew from seeds of etrogim. For people who don't know what an etrog is, it's a citron. It's a citron fruit that's used the Tabernacles festival. Have you tried to grow etrog trees?
Jeremy has successfully grew etrogim, but I don't think any have survived. We had a harsh winter. I can't remember which year it was, but I'm afraid I think they've all died. Of course, we don't have the same climate as you have over there. But I'm not saying he won't try and grow them again. And of course, we've had such a mild winter with global warming. I suspect we will be able to grow them. We have tried. They've got to a certain height, and yeah, we don't have them now. But I'm not saying we won't try again.
One of our viewers, we have a lot of questions coming in from anonymous viewers. This is quite unusual for William, so make of it what you will. But this anonymous guest says, do you take paying guests on the farm?
They want to know what the rates are. We don't generally. What we do is we do make it available to some Jewish youth groups, and certain a few times a year. We have a rabbi's retreat here, and we don't take sort of individual paying guests, but we do make it available for groups because it's lovely for them to come and discover nature or to be in nature and just to get away. But we don't do it too many times a year. And I have run yoga retreats. I'm not a yoga teacher, but as a friend asked me to do that. So we did that a few times, and that was very nice. But it's a lot of hard work, much harder work than looking after animals. And I certainly wouldn't want to keep a hotel because that's what I felt like I was doing, running a bed and breakfast. But no, so we don't generally.
We said we had somebody watching from Ukraine, which we've had people from some rather exotic parts of the world on occasions, but we've never had anybody watching from Ukraine. What is your connection to Ukraine? Why is somebody watching you from there?
Well, I imagine that it's the Rebbetzin in Lviv. And for 20 years, our synagogue in London was twinned with that community, we called it Lvov then, but the Lviv community. And for 20 years, Jeremy and I ran a charity that supported the work of the Rabbi and Rebbetzin in Lviv, to run a school, to feed the old people, to generally just help with the very difficult circumstances. And so the Rabbi and Rebbetzin actually originally came from America. They've lived in Lviv for many, many years. They were there when the war began, and they used the synagogue to take in refugees and to help people. They're still helping people. It is in the book in a shortened form, but our involvement. In fact, a school friend of mine did say to me, she lives up in Scotland, and we don't see each other that often, but she said that having read the book, she had no idea of our involvement with Lviv. Well, I have to say that I think my involvement and Jeremy's involvement with Lviv is one of the highlights of our life. And I have the utmost respect for the work that the Rabbi and Rebbetzin have done there and continue to do, and now in the most difficult circumstances imaginable.
Another place that's mentioned in your book is Stamford. What's the story there? Because it's quite an unusual place to write about.
Stamford. I'm trying to think.
I think you were writing about anti-Semitism and some ancient history or medieval history.
Oh, Stamford. Right. Okay, Stamford. I thought you said Stanford. No, Stamford. Yeah. That's a large part of where the book also began. There were two things. There was the Devon Diaries and then buying some goats from up in Lincolnshire. And as we were driving up to buy these goats, we passed a town called Stamford. And I looked on my iPhone to see about Jews in Stamford, just because I was interested in all the towns that we were passing, whether they had any Jews or Jewish history. And I discovered there'd been a massacre in this town, Stamford, a beautiful little town, back in 1190, the same year that many Jews know about Clifford's Tower and the massacre there. That led me down a complete rabbit hole where I spent some months really looking into the history of the Jews in England, and particularly in medieval England. I learned an awful lot, and an awful lot of it was very chilling. Things like Jews only came to this country with William the Conqueror in 1066, and that Jews were expelled from England in 1290 by the first, and we were not allowed back until Oliver Cromwell. All of this I didn't really know. And I certainly didn't know what had gone on during that period of time from 1066 to 1290. It was pretty chilling. And I made a sort of pilgrimage up to Stamford to walk around the old parts of the town, the medieval parts of the town, to kind of feel as a Jew what it must have been like in some ways, to get the atmosphere. And I did a lot of work, and I thought I was going to write a book about medieval Jewry. In the end, I incorporated that into the book, Jews Milk Goats. And it was because of the goats and buying the goats from Lincolnshire that I found out about the history of the Jews, medieval Jews in this part of England and generally in England. And it's a pretty chilling story. The first blood libel came from England, started in England. So many things that I didn't know. Maybe many other Jews probably did know, but I was pretty ignorant. And it's quite difficult at the moment with anti-Semitism, feeling the same way, that things start in a small way and can quickly get out of control.
Well, let's talk about that. I have to say, you're getting some very good press in the chat. You can probably see a lot of people are complimenting you on this event, and saying how much they've enjoyed it, including Sarah from Lviv, who's just commented now. So on anti-Semitism, you say in the opening pages of the book, you mentioned the tragic events in Israel on the 7th of October, and this also tells our viewers how recently the book's been published, because it's not very long since you finished it, published it. So my question is, have you encountered any anti-Semitic? You say in the book, I wonder if my days here are numbered, and that's quite a profound thing to say. So my question is, have you encountered any anti-Semitism? Have your feelings changed since you wrote that? And what is it that might convince you that you need to actually shut up shop and go?
Well, as it happens, from October the 7th onwards, I have received message after message from my non-Jewish friends here, both in the village, in the surrounding areas. I'm very involved with several groups of the U3A, University of the Third Age, all of whom sent me messages saying, are you okay? Do you have family in Israel? Are they all right? Incredible. What I did find is that many of my Jewish friends in London did not get the same messages. Some did, but unfortunately, many of them were very hurt by the fact that they didn't get those messages from their non-Jewish friends. So I actually feel that I'm very fortunate where I live. I'm accepted. People understand. Look, we're all horrified by what's going on, to the innocents on both sides. And I know that some of my friends here or anywhere else feel very sad, as we all do, for the innocent Palestinians who are being caught in the crossfire. But I felt embraced by the people around here. And at times I felt a bit nervous going to events, thinking, what will they think of me because of what's going on in Gaza? But I've never encountered anything other than love and support. But this feeling of having my bags packed has always been in me, even since I was a child, even though, thank God, I lost nobody, my family lost nobody in the Holocaust. My grandparents came here, again, that's in the book, they came here at the turn of the last century. So we didn't have that experience. But I've always felt that as Jews, we are wandering Jews, and we have to be ready to leave at any moment, as did the medieval Jews from England. They were given a short amount of time to leave, and they left with nothing, most of them. And it could happen again. So I'm aware of that. I don't ever want to leave here, but it could happen. And I've always felt that as Jews, we are always in that precarious position.
Have you heard of the Diagram Prize?
No.
So we had an author on a few years ago called Roy Schwartz, and he had won the Diagram Prize with a book called Is Superman Circumcised? The Diagram Prize is a competition for the oddest book title, and I think this if this is a strong contender, maybe you should enter it. And on that note, have you plans to write another book?
I would love to sit down and write some more. At the moment, I'm transcribing poems that I've written over many, many, many years. And surprising myself a bit like I did when I transcribed my Devon Diary. So there may be a poetry collection. On the other hand, I would like to do a Gables cookery book. I know that one of my friends would very much like to contribute to that, but I'm very keen that people are able to cook simple food, wholesome food. So that's a possibility. There may be further stories from here, but there may be something completely different. So yes, I would like to, but I have to say, in order that my daughter has pushed me to publicize this book, so I have to spend quite a lot of time writing to publications or doing interviews, which is very nice. I mean, this is a particularly lovely and easy event. I'm doing it from my home, and I feel very much amongst friends. So I feel I've still got a bit more to do, and I've got a few more events that are in the diary. But come next winter, I intend to sit down and write some more. Yes,
well,
don't know what it will be yet.
Hopefully you'll come and tell us all about what you've written in due course. Thank you, Jill. This is Jill's book, Jew's Milk Goats. It's available on Amazon and I'm sure elsewhere. And to thank you for being our guest. Some of my photos will be finding their way to you, and I hope you'll enjoy reading this book when it reaches you. So just a few words about our upcoming programme before we go. Next week, on the 26th of February, we've got Dr. Ilana Tahan. Ilana is the lead curator of Hebrew and Christian Orient Studies at the British Library, and she will be sharing some information in great detail about the library's collection of ketubot, Jewish marriage contracts. They have a huge collection of those, and indeed of many other things. Do go there and have a look if you haven't been before. Into March, 4th of March, we've got Saskia Conan Snyder. She's speaking about the unique Jewish contribution to the world of diamonds. And then just 2 days later, we've got a very special live event with John Idaho in Leeds. This is about Esther Simpson and her mission to get scholars out of Nazi Germany. And the talk will be held at the Leeds University, but in a building called the Esther Simpson Building, named after her. And for those that aren't in Leeds or can't attend, the event will also be live streamed. It's actually free, but we'd love to see you there in person if you can get there. To book for these and for details of other future events, as well as to see recordings of our past programme, please visit milim.org.uk. You can sign up to our newsletter there, and you will be sure not to miss anything if you do. All online events are free, but you are welcome to make a donation. We'd love you to keep to contribute towards our costs of putting on these webinars 2 or 3 times a month. It remains for me to thank our guest, Jill Freedman. Thank you so much, Jill. It's been a joy to chat to you.
Thank you. I've loved every minute of it. I can't believe the time has gone already.
And looking forward to seeing you all at a future event. Until then, stay safe. See you soon.